The Philadelphia crime family, also known as the Philadelphia Mafia, or Philly Mob Mafia, is an Italian-American criminal organization based in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. It is one of the most active American mafia families outside of the five families of New York. Formed and based in South Philadelphia, the family operates in various areas in the Philadelphia metropolitan area, Southeastern Pennsylvania and New Jersey. The Philadelphia family is notorious for its violence, due in particular to its succession of violent bosses and multiple mob wars. Under Angelo Bruno's reign, the family enjoyed an era of peace and prosperity. During this time, law enforcement and the media started calling the family the Bruno crime family. A complex dispute involving disgruntled subordinates, the New York Mafia and control of Atlantic City territory led to Bruno's murder in 1980. Bruno's murder set off an internal mob war that lasted over a year until Nicodemo Scarfo took over as boss. During Scarfo's reign, the family was known as the Scarfo crime family. Scarfo's 10-year reign saw the family grow in power, but also become highly unstable. Unlike Bruno, Scarfo was infamous for his short temper and penchant for violence. Scarfo got the family involved in narcotics trafficking and demanded that all criminals pay a street tax for operating in any territory Scarfo considered his own. Scarfo also did not hesitate to order people murdered over moderate disputes. Scarfo's bloody tenure during the 1980s saw the murder of over 20 of his own men. The dramatic rise in violence attracted increased attention from the FBI, Pennsylvania State Police and New Jersey State Police. Increased violence and law enforcement prosecutions also convinced several mobsters to cooperate with the government in order to escape death or prison. Scarfo's downfall came in 1988 when he and most of his top allies were arrested and sentenced to long prison terms. Scarfo's imprisonment eventually led to another internal mob war. With the backing of the Gambino crime family in New York, John Stanfa was named boss of the Philadelphia crime family in 1991. However, a faction of young mobsters led by Joey Merlino disputed his ascension, and by 1993 another war for control of the family began. The war ended in 1994 when Stanfa and most of his supporters were arrested by the FBI. Merlino then took over the family and has been running it ever since. Unlike most of his mafia contemporaries, Merlino was extremely prolific and never camera-shy. The Philadelphia crime family has been severely weakened over the past 30 years due to violence, instability and a crackdown on organized crime by law enforcement. Despite this, it still remains one of the most active mafia families in the country. Today, the family is mostly involved in illegal sports betting operations, loan sharking and extortion. History == beginning == In the early 20th century, several Italian immigrant and Italian-American South Philadelphia street gangs joined to form what would eventually become the Philadelphia crime family. Salvatore Sabella was the first leader of the group that would later bear his name. They busied themselves with bootlegging, extortion, loan sharking, and illegal gambling, and it was during the Prohibition era that Sabella and his crew were recognized as members of the wider Sicilian crime syndicate of New York and Chicago. Sabella retired in late 1931. John Avner and Joe Dovey. After Sabella's retirement, two of his top lieutenants, John Avner and Giuseppe Dovey, began a 5-year war for control of the family. Avner was murdered by members of his own faction on August 17, 1936, and Joseph Joe Bruno Dovey became boss of the Philadelphia family. Dovey had good connections with the Chicago outfit and the five families of New York, and expanded operations to Atlantic City, South Philadelphia, and parts of South Jersey. Narcotics, illegal gambling, loan sharking, and extortion activities provided the family's income, and connections to the Genovese and Gambino crime families grew throughout the 1930s and early 1940s. On October 22, 1946, Dovey died of natural causes at a New York City hospital, and Joseph Joe Ida was appointed by the commission to run the Philadelphia family and its rackets. Influenced by Vito Genovese. Joseph Joe Ida ran the family throughout the 1940s and early 1950s. Ida and the Philadelphia organization were heavily influenced by the bosses of the five families, especially the Genovese crime family, which sought to control both families as Vito Genovese, underboss of the Genovese crime family, assumed control in 1956 after the shooting of former boss Frank Costello, who subsequently retired due to illness. As the Philadelphia family gained more power in Atlantic City and South Jersey, they were viewed as a large faction of the Genovese crime family. Ida and his underboss Dominic Olivetto were present during the 1957 Appalachian Convention with roughly 100 other top mobsters. Around this time, Philadelphia separated from the Genovese crime family, and were given a seat in the national mafia body, the Commission. The meeting was raided by U.S. law enforcement, and over 60 mafioso were arrested and indicted for association with known organized crime members. Ida was named in the indictment and fled to Sicily not long after the meeting, leaving Antonio "Mr. Miggs" Merlino as acting boss in Ida's absence. The Gentle Don after Ida retired in 1959, and Merlino was demoted, Angelo Bruno, nicknamed the Gentle Don, was appointed by the Commission to run the Philadelphia family. Bruno, the first boss of Philadelphia with a seat at the Commission, gained much respect in the underworld and was soon seen as the most powerful mafia boss outside the New York and Chicago area. He expanded the family's profit and operations in lucrative Atlantic City, which had now become known as the Philadelphia family's turf. Bruno himself avoided the intense media and law enforcement scrutiny and outbursts of violence that plagued other crime families, and avoided lengthy prison terms, despite several arrests. His longest prison term was 2 years for refusing to testify to a grand jury. In addition, Bruno did not allow his family to deal in narcotics, or to participate in any part of the drug trafficking that led to Vito Genovese's 15-year prison sentence in 1959. Apparently, Bruno preferred more traditional operations, including labor racketeering, illegal gambling, extortion, bookmaking, and loan sharking. During the early 1960s, the Philadelphia family was officially recognized as the Bruno family. Bruno ran a fairly simple operation. He focused on low-risk, high-reward crimes like labor racketeering and large-scale bookie operations. He also gave his subordinates autonomy as long as he received his share of the profits. He was against any of his men getting involved in narcotics trafficking, fearing the long prison sentences they could bring. Many of his men disagreed with this decision, seeing the large profits that could be made. His men were further angered because Bruno accepted money from John Gambino in order to let the Gambino crime family sell heroin in South New Jersey. His consigliere Antonio Caponigro approached Genovese family boss Frank Thierry in order to seek the Commission's permission to kill Angelo Bruno and take over all his operations in Philadelphia and New Jersey. Thierry, sensing an opportunity to take Caponigro's North New Jersey rackets with him dead, lied to Caponigro and told him he had the Commission's support. On March 12, 1980, Bruno was shot in the back of the head while in his car. The killing was committed by Scarpos Frank Sindone and John Simone. Philadelphia Mafia War That April, Caponigro visited New York City under the assumption he was about to be confirmed as boss. Instead, he was tortured and murdered for killing a Commission member without permission. His driver that night, John Stanfa, escaped with only minor injuries and also became a suspect in the murder. Stanfa would eventually be sentenced to 8 years for refusing to testify during the trials. Within weeks, Caponigro was found dead in the trunk of his car, and Simone and Sindone were murdered in September and October 1980, respectively. Their plan to overthrow Bruno and take the lead had led to their own demise. In the power struggle that followed Bruno's death, about 16 men were killed. Bruno's underboss, Philip Testa, became the next boss in the aftermath. However, he was killed by a nail bomb just under a year later on March 15, 1981. Testa's murder was believed to have been orchestrated by his underboss Peter Kaesler and Frank Narducci, Sr. in yet another attempt to take control of the family. Kaesler called a meeting with Testa's consigliere Nicodemo Scarfo soon after Testa's death. Kaesler told Scarfo that, at a meeting with Paul Castellano and Fat Tony Salerno, He had been made the new boss and that Narducci was to be the new underboss. Scarfo was suspicious and set up a meeting with the two New York bosses the next day. At that meeting, Scarfo discovered that Kaesler had been lying. Scarfo was a Bruno crime family mobster who operated in Atlantic City, New Jersey. Previously a struggling resort town, legalized gambling was a boon to the city's legal and illegal economy. Despite long being recognized as Philadelphia Mafia territory, the New York families now wanted Atlantic City to be an open town. Scarfo reached a compromise by giving the New York families portions of Atlantic City while keeping a significant portion for himself. With the commission's support, Scarfo was named the boss of the Philadelphia crime family. Little Nicky Scarfo Scarfo named Salvatore Chucky Merlino as his underboss and Frank Monti as his consigliere. Narducci was murdered by Salvatore Testa and Joey Punito and Kaesler was forced into retirement in Florida. Scarfo demoted Bruno's mob captains and replaced them with recently inducted members Phil Leonetti, Testa, Lawrence Yogi Merlino and Joseph Chicky Ciancaglini, Sr. When Scarfo became the boss, he wanted to unify organized crime in the area and dreamed of running a smooth criminal empire. The last person to stand in his way was Harry Riccobene. Riccobene was a well-respected, long-time mobster who neither liked nor respected Scarfo and saw him unfit to be boss. With Scarfo off the street doing a brief prison term, the Riccobene War ensued between 1982 and 1984. The Riccobene faction was able to kill Scarfo's consigliere Frank Monti, while Riccobene himself survived multiple attempts on his life by Scarfo's men. Riccobene's own men cooperated with the government against Riccobene in exchange for light prison sentences after their arrests. The war ended 1984 when Riccobene was arrested and convicted of Monti's murder. In 1982, Tommy Del Giorno, Fafi Iannarella, Joseph J. Scarfo and Pat the Cat Spirito were formally inducted into the Philadelphia crime family. The ceremony was held at the Buena Tavern in Vineland, New Jersey. Scarfo soon installed a mob practice somewhat alien to Philadelphia criminals. The street tax was enforced by soldiers like Tommy Del Giorno and associates like Nick the Crow Caramondi. The tax was paid by any criminal working independently from the mafia. Drug dealers, bookmakers, pimps and guys running numbers in the territory that Scarfo deemed his own were forced to pay his street tax weekly. Scarfo became notorious of his ruthless nature. Scarfo demanded complete allegiance to him and ordered people murdered over signs of disrespect, insubordination or resistance. Soon after his promotion to boss, the number of organized crime-related murders escalated in the 1980s. On September 14, 1984, Scarfo loyalist Salvatore Testa was murdered. Despite serving under Scarfo and committing several murders on his behalf, Scarfo granted his underboss Salvatore Merlino permission to kill Testa for breaking off his engagement with Merlino's daughter. Nicky Scarfo wanted Dominic DeVito, also known as Mickey Diamond, dead, but couldn't have him killed because of the friendship DeVito had with his Scarfo's friend Nick Caramondi. Finally, Scarfo decided that he'd have DeVito killed and anyone else that didn't follow his orders as he saw fit. He gave the contract to Funzi and Mark Marconi to test their loyalty to him. They proved themselves loyal and shot DeVito in the head, then left his body in the trunk of a car. In the aftermath of the hit, Pat the Cat Spirito was promoted to captain. Nick the Crow Caramondi acquired DeVito's loan sharking books and began collecting from the debtors. Caramondi had demonstrated himself loyal to Scarfo. Chelsea's Boras was enjoying a meal in a restaurant with his girlfriend Jeanette Curro and several other friends, including Ray Martorano, when a man entered and motioned for Martorano to get out of the way as he took aim. The hitman opened fire, killing Boras and his girlfriend Curro. Scarfo ordered the death of Greek mob boss Chelsea's because he had been horning in on the methamphetamine trade in Philadelphia and not paying Scarfo's street tax. Johnny Calabrese and Joseph Ciancaglini, walked from Caslittle, Italy, a restaurant owned by Tommy Del Giorno, who had bought it from the Piccolo brothers. As Calabrese and Ciancaglini walked, Tommy Del Giorno and Frank Fafi Iannarella ran up behind them. When the shooting started, Chicky casually walked away. 4 bullets killed Calabres, and his killers escaped in a car driven by Pat Spirito. Johnny Calabres was a loan shark and drug dealer who operated through a chain of pawn shops in Atlantic City. Calabres had refused to pay the street tax. Scarfo was more than pleased with how Del Giono and Iannarella had handled the assignment. After Calabres was left dying in the gutter by Scarfo's hitmen, Frankie Flowers D'Alfonso was brutally beaten by Salvatore Testa and Joey Pugnator for refusing to pay the street tax. He was later murdered in 1985 by Joseph Ligambi and Frank Narducci's 2 sons Phil and Frank, Jr. In the aftermath of the hit, Pat the Cat Spirito was promoted to captain. Nick Caramundi acquired DeVito's loan sharking books and began collecting from the debtors. He gave DeVito's girlfriend $6,000 to pay for the funeral, but Caramundi made sure that every other penny went directly into Scarfo's pockets. Nick the Crow had clearly shown himself deeply loyal to Scarfo. Second Mafia War equals, in 1988, Scarfo and 16 of his men were convicted of racketeering and murder charges. The large arrest and trial crippled the Philadelphia crime family permanently. Along with Scarfo, underboss Philip Leonetti, 3 of the family's 4 capos or captains, Joseph Ciancaglini, Francis Iannarella Jr. and Didone, and soldiers such as Albert Pontani, Salvatore Merlino and Charles Yarnes were arrested. The prosecutions were strengthened by a couple members agreeing to cooperate with law enforcement and testify at trial for the government in order to escape long prison terms and Scarfo's ruthless regime. Scarfo's underboss and nephew Phil Leonetti was the biggest defector, followed by Capo Tommy Del Giono, Nicholas Nicky Crow Caramundi and Yogi Merlino. Successful investigations and prosecutions decimated some of the crime family's most profitable criminal operations. Law enforcement severely crippled the mafia's influence on local labor unions, the local mob's biggest moneymaker. Police also broke up numerous mob-run illegal betting parlors that took in bets totaling hundreds of millions of dollars. Many more mobsters would later be sentenced to long prison terms for crimes such as racketeering, narcotics trafficking and murder. This caused the number of mafia members to dwindle in the 1990s, with fewer new guys available to replace all those being convicted of serious crimes. After all the defendants received lengthy prison terms, it became clear that Scarfo would not be able to maintain control of the family from prison much longer. John Stanfa was a Sicilian-born mobster who helped run the family for Scarfo while he was in prison. With the support of the influential Gambino crime family in New York, Stanfa was named boss of the Philadelphia crime family in 1991. This did not go well with some young mobsters who saw Stanfa as an outsider and unsuitable to run the family. Many of these mobsters were sons or nephews of Scarfo lieutenants and felt it was their turn to run the crime family. These young, overly ambitious men were led by Joseph Skinny Joey Merlino, who was the son of former underboss Salvatore Merlino. While Merlino was serving prison time at the Federal Correctional Institution, McKean in 1990, he met Ralph Natale. Natale was an older mobster who used to be friends with deceased boss Angelo Bruno. It was in prison with Natale that Merlino first discussed taking over the Philadelphia family. The plan was for Merlino to start a war for control of the crime family, then have Natale named boss when he was released from prison. When Merlino was released from prison, he recruited his childhood friends into the plan. These men included Michael Ciancaglini, Stephen Mazzun, George Borgesi, Martin Angelina and Michael Lancilotti. Stanfa was aware of the divide in his family and tried to find a peaceful solution. He named Joseph Ciancaglini, Jr., the brother of Merlino's best friend, as his new underboss. Stanfa hoped that this would appease the Merlino-Natale faction and bring them under his banner, but it did not work. Tensions escalated and by 1993 another war for control of the Philadelphia crime family was underway. Merlino's loyalists shot and incapacitated underboss Joseph Ciancaglini, Jr. while Stanfa's faction killed Merlino Lieutenant Michael Ciancaglini. They continued attacking each other for months while Merlino escaped several attempts on his life. Being the boss of the Philadelphia crime family, Stanfa had a larger army at his command and also recruited a lot of outside hitmen to fight in the war. The Merlino-Natal faction was smaller, but worked around this by allying with other Philadelphia criminal organizations including the Pagans Motorcycle Club and the Junior Black Mafia, while also convincing some members of the Philadelphia crime family to switch sides. In 1994, Stanfa and his top allies were arrested on racketeering-related charges. Around the same time, Natal was released from prison. With most of Stanfa's supporters locked up, Merlino and Natal moved in on the criminal rackets of Philadelphia and grabbed control of the Philadelphia crime family. Natal was named boss of the Philadelphia crime family, Merlino was named underboss, and Ronnie Turkey became consigliere. Merlino takes over. While Natal had the support of the Genovese family, he was unfamiliar with the criminal landscape of the Philadelphia, New Jersey area due to his nearly 15-year imprisonment. Merlino was charged with running most of the crime family's day-to-day activities. However, it soon became clear that Merlino held more power in the Philadelphia Mafia than Natal. In fact, Merlino and his allies let Natal become boss so that he would be the focus of law enforcement attention. Merlino was effectively the street boss, with him and his young allies calling shots and profiting from rackets and schemes Natal was not made aware of. Merlino was also the crime family's main link to many of the other criminal groups in Philadelphia. Merlino was only 32 years old, an extremely young age for any mobster, let alone a leader of a mafia family. Merlino and his allies were all young and inexperienced in running a criminal organization. They were also flashy, violent and loved the limelight. Merlino was often spotted by reporters and cameramen on the streets of South Philadelphia, followed by an entourage of young mobsters. Merlino's high profile brought a lot of attention from the press and law enforcement. The crime family itself was unstable, with things poorly managed by Merlino's crew whose violent reputation was used to keep things in order. The Merlino faction's arrogance and aggressiveness turned off a lot of criminals from working with the crime family. Merlino's associates were also involved in drug deals in Philadelphia and Boston while overseeing the crime family's gambling, loan sharking, stolen goods and extortion rackets. When Natal was arrested in 1998, he agreed to cooperate with the FBI in exchange for a light sentence and admittance into the federal witness relocation program. Natal had enough of Merlino undermining him and did not want to face spending the rest of his life in prison. In 1999, Merlino, along with his underboss Stephen Mazzun, his consigliere George Borgesi, Martin Angelina, John Ciancaglini and others were arrested for racketeering, illegal gambling, extortion and murder. Natal testified on the government's behalf, going into detail of the crimes Merlino's crew committed. Despite the prosecution's strong case, the defendants were acquitted of all murder charges. Merlino was also acquitted of narcotics trafficking charges. However, they were all convicted of racketeering-related charges, with Merlino and Borgesi getting the longest prison sentences at 14 years each. The rise of Ligambi. In 1997, Joseph Ligambi was released from prison after a murder conviction was overturned and he was acquitted at a retrial. After 10 years in prison, Ligambi returned to a much different mafia family that saw two violent regime changes and the family under the control of a group of young mobsters. Ligambi, who is Borgesi's uncle, was a Scarfo-era soldier when he was imprisoned in 1987 and was also a protege of Merlino's dad, Salvatore. Upon his release, Ligambi went right back to work for the crime family. He was well respected among his peers for accepting his life sentence like a man instead of betraying his crime family to the authorities to escape prison time. When Merlino and company were arrested, Merlino named Ligambi acting boss of the family. Ligambi continued as acting boss after their convictions on racketeering-related crimes in 2001. Ligambi stabilized the family when he took over, maintained membership and restored relations with the New York families. Ligambi was smart and, unlike previous leaders, maintained a very low profile and was less likely to resort to violence to settle disputes. Ligambi created a tight-knit group around the family's new leadership, rarely conducting business without going through intermediaries, thereby insulating himself from law enforcement scrutiny. His inner circle includes longtime Philadelphia mobsters Joseph "Mousy" Marciano, Gatian Lucibolo, and Anthony Staino. With many people approving of the way Ligambi ran things, law enforcement believed that he had taken over the family permanently. However, the FBI would later learn that unlike previous bosses Natale, Stanfa and Scarfo, Merlino was able to maintain control of the crime family while in prison. When Merlino faction leaders Martin Angelina, John Ciancaglini, and Stephen Mazzon were released from prison in the 2000s, they all fell in line with Ligambi. Ligambi was left to deal with the damage Joey Merlino had done to the family's relationship with illegal bookmakers, who refused to do business with the Philadelphia crime family because Merlino used to make huge bets, then never paid when he lost. By the mid-2000s, the family consisted of approximately 50 members, half of whom were incarcerated, in addition to almost 100 associates. During Ligambi's tenure, around a dozen made men were released from prison, filling the ranks. Many of these men were young players who fell victim to the family's unstable history and are now middle-aged. In contrast to Merlino, Ligambi maintains a low profile, and is more interested in making money than headlines. He named Anthony Staino, his closest and most loyal associate, as his underboss. Under Ligambi's direction, the family was able to muscle in on several video poker gambling machine businesses in the Philadelphia area. In May 2011, Ligambi and 14 other members and associates of the crime family were indicted by the FBI on racketeering charges related to illegal gambling operations and loan sharking. 7 of those indicted pleaded guilty to lesser charges. 1 became a government witness and 7 went to trial in October 2012. The defendants were acquitted on 45 counts, found guilty on 5 counts, and were undecided on 11 counts. Joseph Licata was acquitted of his only charge and Staino, facing a retrial on the charges he was not convicted of, took a plea agreement for a lighter sentence. Ligambi and Borgesi were beat all the remaining charges at a retrial and were released in January 2014. Merlino was released from prison on March 15, 2011, and served 6 months in a halfway house in Florida. Merlino continues to serve as the boss of the crime family. He has run things by proxy, delegating most duties since 2011 to his acting boss, Stephen Mazzon, and his acting underboss John Ciancaglini. Current leaders and membership: Boss, Joseph "Skinny" Joey Merlino; Acting Boss, Steve Mazzon; Acting Underboss, John "Johnny" Chang Ciancaglini, a known criminal in Philadelphia. His family can be traced back to Nicky Scarfo's teenage years. Ciancaglini's father was recently released from prison after serving nearly 30 years for racketeering-related activities. The younger Ciancaglini has also served prison, on an extortion charge, for a full 9-year sentence. Consigliere: Joseph Ligambi, former acting boss now in semi-retirement. South Philadelphia faction: Capo, Michael "Mikey" Lance Lancilotti. A smart and low-key captain who has not been convicted of a major crime. Capo, Martin "Marty" Angelina. In 2001, he was convicted of racketeering with Joey Merlino, and was sentenced to 78 months. In September 2012, he was sentenced to 57 months on racketeering, loan sharking and illegal gambling charges. Soldier: Anthony Nicodemo. He was charged with the murder of Gino Di Pietro, and was a suspect in 2003 when John Xanto was gunned down. Pleaded guilty to being the driver in the Di Pietro murder and is serving a 25 to 50-year sentence. Soldier: Frank Gambino. Gambino and 4 other Philadelphia crime family members allegedly stole $405,871 worth of goods from a Philadelphia shipping port. Soldier: Salvatore "Sonny" Mazzon. He is the brother of Philadelphia crime family acting boss, Steve Mazzon, who attacked and bit off a part of a civilian's nose on the streets of Philadelphia. Soldier: Joseph Marciano. In 2004, he pled guilty to charges of racketeering related to gambling and loan sharking, and was sentenced to 10 years in prison. As of October 2012, He was on trial for additional charges of racketeering related to electronic gambling devices. Soldier, George Borgesi. Ligambi's nephew, he was scheduled to be released from prison on July 3, 2012, before being charged with overseeing a loan sharking operation in Delaware County from his prison cell in North Carolina. He has a couple of other family members working as associates for the Philadelphia crime family. Was released from prison on January 24, 2014. South New Jersey faction Scarpo, Anthony Staino. He was charged with loan sharking after a Philadelphia bookie, Henry Saipian, failed to pay Staino his $80,000. Saipian testified against Staino and said that Staino threatened to put a bullet in his head. Soldier, Anthony Borgesi. Philip Ligambi and Borgesi were charged in 1994 with assault on a mother and her 16-year-old son over a business deal. North New Jersey faction Scarpo, Joseph Scoops Licata. A former acting captain, he was sentenced to 14 years in 1994 after George Vcilone recorded secret conversations, and Licata was charged under major gambling operations in Newark. Soldier, Vincent Beeps Centurino. In 1994, he and other high-profile Philadelphia crime family mobsters, including Nicky Scarfo Jr., were tapped by the FBI, and all pleaded guilty. Historical leadership. Boss 1911-1931 Salvatore Sabella retired, deceased in 1962. 1931-1936 John Nazanavna murdered on August 17, 1936. 1936-1946 Giuseppe Joseph Bruno Dovi, 1946-1959 Giuseppe Joseph Ida deported in 1958, deceased in 1960s-1970s. Acting 1958-1959 Antonio Mr. Miggs Merlino deposed by commission. 1959-1980 Angelo the Gentle Don Bruno murdered on March 21, 1980. 1980-1981 Philip the Chicken Man Testo murdered on March 15, 1981. 1981-1991 Nicodemo Little Nicky Scarfo imprisoned for life. Acting 1981-1984 Salvatore Chucky Merlino, acting 1987-1991 Anthony Tony Buck Piccolo. 1991-1994 Giovanni John Stanfa imprisoned for life. 1994 presenter Joseph Skinny Joey Merlino arrested in 1999, released in 2011 Font Boss 1994-1999 Ralph Natel arrested in 1998, turned informant in 1999. Acting Boss 1999-2011 Joseph Ligambi, acting Boss 2011 presenter Stephen Handsome Stevie Mazun. Underbosses 1911-1931 John Nazanavna became boss. 1931-1936 Giuseppe Joseph Bruno Dovi became boss. 1936-1946 Giuseppe Joseph Ida became boss. 1946-1956 Marco Smallman Reginelli, 1956-1957 Dominic Olivetto retired. 1957-1959 Antonio Mr. Miggs Merlino deposed by commission, 1959-1970 Ignazio Nats De Niro, 1970-1980 Philip the Chicken Man Testo became boss. 1980-1981 Peter Petty Casler deposed by commission, 1981-1986 Salvatore Chucky Merlino imprisoned in 1986, deceased in 2012. Acting 1982-1984 Salvatore Salvi Testo murdered on September 14, 1984. 1986-1989 Philip Crazy Phil Leonetti turned informant. 1989-1990 Pasquale Patti Specs Martirano, 1990-1994 Joseph Joey Chang Cyan Caglini J shot, paralyzed and incapacitated. Acting 1992-1994 Frank Martins. 1994 to 1999 Euro Joseph Skinny Joey Merlino Euro became official boss. 1999 to 2004 Euro Stephen Handsome Stevie Mazzani Euro imprisoned in 2001. 2004 Euro 2012 Euro Joseph Mousy Marsimino Euro imprisoned June 2004 Euro 2010 acting 2007 to 2010 Euro Martin Marti Angelina Euro promoted to acting underboss. Acting 2010 Euro 2011 Euro Anthony Stano. 2011 present, John Johnny Changsai and Caglini. Consigliere 1911-1931 Euro Giuseppe Joseph Bruno Dovi Euro became underboss. 1931 to 1936 Euro Giuseppe Joseph Ida Euro became underboss. 1936 to 1946 Euro Marco Smallman Reginelli Euro became underboss. 1946 to 1977 Euro Giuseppe Joe the Boss Rugnata. 1977 to 1980 Euro Antonio Tony Bananas Caponegro Euro murdered by commission. 1980 to 1981 Euro Nicodemo Little Nicky Scarfo Euro became boss. 1981 to 1982 Euro Frank Monti Euro murdered. 1982 to 1989 Euro Nicholas Nicky Buck Piccolo, acting 1984 to 1987 Euro Anthony Piccolo. 1989 to 1994 Euro Anthony Piccolo Euro imprisoned for life, deceased in 2004. 1994 to 1996 Euro Ronald Ronnie Turkey Euro demoted, murdered in 1999. 1996 to 1999 Euro Stephen Handsome Stevie Mazzani Euro promoted underboss. 1999 Euro 2011 Euro George Freckles Borgesi Euro imprisoned in 2001 to 2012. Acting 2001 to 2004 Euro Joseph Joe Crutch Curro, acting 2004 to 2011 Euro Gettin Lucibolo. 2011 Euro present, Joseph Uncle Joe Ligambi. Government informants, Nicholas Nicky the Crow Caramundi, Mario Ricobene, Ron Previte, Ralph Natale, Phil Leonetti. See also, Frank Palumbo, Italian Market, South Philadelphia. References. Further reading, Anastasia, George. Blood and Honor, Inside the Scarfo Mob, the Mafia's Most Violent Family. 2004, ISBN 0940159864, Anastasia, George. Goodfellow Tapes. Anastasia, George. The Last Gangster. Wagman, Robert J. Blood Oath. Morello, Celestin. Book 1 Before Bruno, The History of the Mafia and La Cosa Nostra in Philadelphia. Publication date, 42,000, ISBN 9780967733418, Morello, Celestin. Book 2 Before Bruno, The History of the Philadelphia Mafia, 1931 to 1946. Publication date, 112,001, ISBN 9780967733425, Morello, Celestin. Book 3 Before Bruno and How He Became Boss, The History of the Philadelphia Mafia, Book 3, 1946-1959. Publication date, 82,005, ISBN 9780977053209. External links, Hitting the Hitmen Even Alleged Killers Can Be Beaten Up by a Gang of Thugs by Brendan McGarvey, IPSN, The Philadelphia Atlantic City Mob.